Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast. I'm really excited this week, after lots of comments that have come through, to talk to you or ask you a question or join in with me in exploring if fascia is the secret to spiritual awakening. For me, it is, although it's not necessarily so much a secret as a segue. It's just a segue that we don't all know that we already have. And I think by expanding our view to include what research is showing us is available through our understanding of working with the body and the being that animates it, we actually can find access to our own spiritual awareness. We can develop it, and it's all in here. It's not out there that has to be brought in. It's already here that we can expand our view to include what's around us. Let me make sense of that. So I think that fascia is mostly considered, and everyone will agree now, because the research has been going on for decades, that fascia is a web-like tissue, a kind of wrapping around our muscles, our bones, and our organs. Now, what's shifting and expanding that into seeing it as part of our overall well-being is essentially understanding that it's like the liquid crystal, sticky, gluey stuff, a bit like egg white, that holds all of us together at every scale. So that's sort of inside the cell is like a gel-like consistency, and around the cells, and then around the cells that form the organs, and the organs that form the whole organism, and the in-between. Now, technically, from an anatomical point of view, it gets tricky to talk about the in-between and the spaces in between things in the body, for the very simple reason that there are no empty spaces in the human body as such. Nature abhors a vacuum. So everything, even though it appears as a virtual space, that's what it's called, actually is spaced, nevertheless, to be in the right place within us. And bear in mind, as embryos, we self-organized all of that through this liquid crystal matrix. It's the everywhereness. I've shared this many times before. We call it the ubiquitous tissue. An absolutely beautiful research by Neil Theise, who wrote a fabulous book called Notes on Complexity, goes into that quite deeply from a scientific point of view to help us understand how we can expand to incorporate a larger view of how this tissue holds us together, supports us, includes our structure, but also facilitates communication between those structures. But what if I told you that fascia just might be much more than a physical component? What if it holds the keys to unlocking our spiritual awakening? As in, we are already spiritual beings animating form. I personally believe we are spiritual beings having an experience in Earth School, and we're mostly spiritual beings, only a little bit of us is in Earth School, undergoing an awakening that all of that is already within us. I mean, think about it. Many of us experience a disconnection between our physical selves and our spiritual selves. It's as if we think, and that's the key word, it's as if we think they're separate. We might feel like we're living in a body that somehow isn't profoundly connected to our true essence. And that feeling of separation, that feeling of your spiritual aspect being separate from your physical aspect, that when you're doing something, somehow your spirit stands and watches you from behind or something. I'm not quite sure. We all have different interpretations. But I do know that it can lead to feelings of emptiness or confusion, or a sense of being lost, or or that we've lost our sense of belonging. And sometimes that can translate into feeling as if we don't belong to the body that we animate. And I mean, there's all sorts of spiritual practices, and every single one of them has a value if it's the right one for us. For example, it might be meditation or a self-help book or a conversation that we have with somebody. But there can still be this sense that something's missing, this sense of disconnection. And it feels as if it affects both our ability to be our fully expressed self in the spiritual sense, but has an impact on our physical and our emotional well-being, or we might call it mental health. We all have different names and we all mean slightly different things by these. And sometimes, and I meet a lot of people in chronic pain under great stress and anxiety, because sometimes it can manifest as what we experience as physical pain. And that process of anxiety can become almost a constant companion. And that makes it harder to feel grounded and connected. And it's almost like we're pursuing this holistic state of wellness through trial and error, always hoping to find this elusive balance. There's a wonderful word in French, équilibre, which means equilibrium, equal freedom. And for me, that freedom is the freedom to move between the spiritual and the physical aspect of each other. And in fact, let that in between unite them. It's a wholeness. What if we already are spiritual beings containing a physical experience, animated, and here's a key, made a sense of through our sensory making fabric, our fascia matrix. Now, here's where we have to get very careful. And if any of you out there have read any of the work of Iain McGilchrist, he's brilliant in my world. I'm sure there's people that don't agree with me, but whatever. His work is brilliant. And his book, The Master and the Emissary, is about the different sides of our brain. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of left brain and right brain thinking. But what tends to happen in our culture is that we allocate X, Y, and Z to the left brain and A, B, and C to the right brain, or the other way around. And we talk about the masculine and feminine side, or we talk about the creative and the literal side, or we talk about the separate, like, branches of the brain. Now, I had this incredible sense of confirmation every time I read a word that Dr. McGilchrist writes. His writing it's just genius. And he talks about the fact that the left and right hemispheres of the brain are not so much separate as they have different preferences. And of course, we have to organize both of them. And within them, there are aspects that are available to both sides of the brain, but they're just not the same. Now, I do not pretend to be a neuroscientist or to have anything like his knowledge. However, what was confirmed for me when I read his work and Jill Bolte-Taylor's beautiful work, who is a neuroscientist, and the kind of the translation of their work that Martha Beck brings out in her beautiful book, Beyond Anxiety, another one I can't recommend highly enough, is the importance to all of us from a physical and spiritual point of view of fascia as the proprioceptive interface. Now, why am I in love with that idea so much? Well, it's work that's been done in the lab in research. It wasn't always put forward. Sometimes it was hidden for about 50 years or more now. That explains how our fascia matrix is not just a wrapping of muscles or a wrapping of bones or a wrapping of organs or a wrapping of tubes. It's what we're made out of. It is the in-between of all of us, because we self-organize embryologically as a whole, and we were whole and complete. And within that, we began heart-centered, heart first. The heart begins to form this rhythmic syncopation of the brain forming, but the heart feeds the brain, not the other way round. The order in which this happens kind of feels simultaneous, but over 8 weeks, you self-organized through your fascial matrix in 361 degrees. I prefer to say 365, but that's another whole story. In 361 degrees of roundness, you shaped yourself like a toroid. You moved through yourself to bring yourself into being. And there is a toroidal aspect to the pattern of the brain. Another whole discussion about the shape of it and all of that. But the point here is that there are lots of discussions in the world. Dean Juhan in Job's Body, for example, talks about the fact that the fluid of this area, the specific chemistry of that fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, might be what's inside the tubular networks of the fascial helical structures throughout the body. Now, if that's true, the fascia invites our brain all through us. And Dr. McGilchrist invites us to think or consider that the thoughts, the thinking, verbalizing, loving of words, left brain, is a very different way of us communicating to ourselves to the right brain conceptual sensing, feeling, awareness. So it's not that they're so different, it's just that they have completely different expressions. Let me give you an example of that. The left brain preference is for words that analyze, distinguish, and confirm how something is from historical evidence that suggests it's the right conclusion. In other words, it likes putting words to things. It is the source of our narrative. The right brain prefers the sensory awareness. It doesn't do the verbalizing. It creates the nuance, the sensory awareness of it. It's the place where you can't really put it into words. Now, this is so important because whenever I'm teaching bodywork of any sort, manual therapy or movement, I train trainers to learn to listen for what we call somatic register. What is somatic register? What it means is when you've done some movement work or you've done some manual therapy, and hear me out, even if you're not a movement teacher or a manual therapist, hear me. When you get off a bodywork table or when you've finished a movement sequence and the practitioner says to you, how do you feel? How are you doing? The best result that practitioner can ask for is the response is kind of, oh, I don't know. Because that client has gone inside. They're in the right hemisphere aspect of themselves, the proprioceptive awareness of themselves, dropping into, I don't know, the mystery. Dropping into, oh, it feels different. It feels, and they'll use words like heavier, lighter, warmer, stronger, clearer, more balanced, less stiff. They can't find the vocabulary. And that in and of itself tells the practitioner that that client's body is talking to them rather than their thinking mind. And what we're saying here isn't that the thinking mind is wrong or that the sensing body is wrong. But if we can expand to include them both, we have a much more powerful resource, and both aspects belong to us, and we belong to both aspects. We have the power of context as well as the content. Now, the thinking mind wants to understand all that, wants to do the research, wants to intellectualize it, wants to name the anatomical parts and the biomechanical functions. And the proprioceptive aspect of that just wants to breathe and feel pain-free. We have to find a way of giving ourselves permission to expand and include both. Historically, we are trained, I've been trained the same way, divide and conquer. Divide the body down into its component parts and conquer it and beat the dis-ease, the discomfort, the difficulty. Or we can consider expanding to include all that, which just might be the source of our anxiety, and enter the mystery of the silence of listening to the proprioceptive feedback. That subtle sense, our sixth sense, actually, I think it's our primary sense because it's how we sensed our way into form in the first place. The embryo didn't go to university to learn to be you. You already did that, by the way. This is why I mean awakening to what already is. Hello. It's already there. Expanding into that awareness, because what happens in that moment is you sit there in awe. There's a part of you going, what is she talking about? Could she be right? And that, I'm not trying to be right, by the way. I'm inviting you to consider that something in what I'm saying is animating confirmation in you. It's not information. All the information is doing is giving you a sense of, it might be true, a sense of, what if there really is research for the last 50 years that we haven't been following, that we didn't choose to prioritize? Because there is. I'll talk about it more another time. But what that research does is it tells us that the fascial matrix is listening. It's listening to you all the time. One of the questions we might ask is, are we listening to it? And when we do we want to analyze and verbalize what it's saying to us? Put it into words so that we get it? Or can we just be present to it? And in that moment, can we relax? Because it is the way that it is. Because our bodies are actually wired to connect with our surroundings. We know that, all about circadian rhythms and ultradian rhythms and all sorts of different subtle processes that our bodies go through. And we kind of know when we're out of sync. I mean, it shows up in our lives as disruption or dis-ease or discomfort or dissatisfaction. So how do we actually bridge this gap and find harmony within ourselves? Well, one way is working with ourselves, moving, feeling, animating our form. Because research has shown some fascinating insights that fascia is just not a passive tissue. It's dynamic. It responds to our environment. It feeds back to us. And whether that's our inner environment in different places in the body communicating with the other areas of our inner environment, or whether it's our outer environment translating towards us, there is this process going on that we actually don't need to know about cognitively. Let me give you an example. When the temperature goes up, when the body's working well, it simply begins to very gently release fluid, we call it sweat, to bring our temperature back into balance. That doesn't need to be a cognitive process where we write down a list of how much water's in the body and how much heat is on the outside and we analyze the temperature. It's not an intellectual process. It's an instinctive process, just like moving is. And our proprioceptive awareness is more of an intuitive process. Intellect is much slower. Intuition is much faster. It sometimes almost feels as if it's in advance. But the place where we activate those is in present time, in our instinct. We go back to that Mobius loop: history, mystery, magic. Everything we know intellectually, everything we can put into words, all the content, everything we sense intuitively, everything we kind of feel, that essence. And the magic is expressing that as us the way we can at the time. So imagine if we can expand and include our experiences and observe them. And there's your key. Observing and listening. We know from research that fascia contains sensory nerve endings. That means it's communicating all the time. We also know it communicates at a different speed to our nervous system. So in a sense, our nervous system, which we used to attribute with all our feelings, actually is catching up. Our awareness is much faster. And all of this means that fascia is likely playing a much more significant role in how we perceive and, I assert, perceive our interaction with the world around us and how we interpret it, the world, and how we interpret the world within us. It indicates that it really is our organ of proprioception, but it isn't in a place. It's not just in the right brain. It's the fabric, the folds, the tissues, the connective tissues between the hemispheres of the brain, around the brain, something called the tentorium, which is communicating with the dural tube, your spine, and all of your nervous system. It forms the structure of your nerves and all the tissues around them. It's almost like an awareness web. And it's as if we can drop into the silence and the listening and the space between us and what's around us, between the things we can name that are within us. And instead of having a game of divide and conquer so that we can overcome the problems of the body, we have a game of unite, unify, be aware of all of it. And in that stillness between us and the thing we're observing or the thing we're listening to is the possibility of what we could call spiritual awareness. As if we open to it bubbling up through us the way that it does. Like you, every single one of you, every one of them, every one of us, everybody is unique. Unique space, unique place, unique time, unique grace, unique way. Diversity and inclusivity already are. We already are diverse and inclusive. And what I think happens with us is we reflect a kind of a cultural change that we're all going through by treating ourselves as if we're divided and need to be conquered. As if our fascia is somehow separate from everything else in our body. It isn't. It's the unifying matrix. So what can we awake to? Well, we can awaken to what already is. If we can learn to listen and work with our fascial matrix already being the way that it is, perhaps we can unlock different levels, different qualities, different depths, different availabilities of consciousness and connection to our true selves. What would you call your true self? If your true self knocked on your door and said, "Hi, I'm here. How are you doing?" and they were the best version of you that you can imagine, who would they be? And in that moment of imagination, before you analysed it, before you remembered your goals, before you wrote your purpose down, that little moment of who would your true self be? There was awe. There was wonder. What if that's already stored inside of you? All there is to do is know that and listen. What if you already have access to them? I get the privilege of working with a lot of people, and a lot of them are practitioners who have a lot of stories about their clients, and a lot of them are clients who have stories about themselves and their families. And I have seen experiences of all kinds of things, light bulbs going on. Some people call it emotional release. Other people call it a spiritual connection. It kind of resolves, it puts into solution their anxiety, and it turns it into curiosity because they can't explain everything. And often we panic and get anxious because we can't explain something. But what it becomes in that situation is an awareness that I can't explain this because it isn't about words. It's about this ability to trust that my fascial net, my fascial interface, the liquid crystal matrix of me, is there managing it anyway. I think of one story that stands out of somebody who, after literally years of chronic pain and disconnection from their body, they ran this critical list of what was wrong with them every day, discovered the power of her own fascia matrix through subtle treatment and micro movement. And these gentle movements, integrating breath and an atmosphere conducive to holding that kind of awareness, she began to experience really profound shifts that she couldn't explain in her left brain analysis. It was physical, it was emotional, it was mental, it was spiritual, it was about feeling better. It was about relaxing. Not going soggy and floppy, not becoming sedentary, but about moving through life without being kind of anxious about what the outcome would be, because they settled in a place of peace by being willing to not know that, and to see that not knowing as the beauty of the mystery that is in all of us, because it is a mystery. And what they said to me at the time was that instead of thinking it's all hopeless or difficult or fear-based, and there was a list of negative words, I'm just enjoying being aware of stillness and the space between things. And here's what I'm giving you today, because it's a gift to me. It is a gift for me from my spiritual teacher, and it's a gift to me from the people that feed back the difference it makes to them. Is recognizing physical things like between me and the computer screen, or between you and your phone if you're looking at this on your phone, or the physical space between you and something else in the room that you're in. Or it might be a listening space. Listen to the spaces between my words. If you've got this speeded up, try listening to it slowed down. I know, who does that in the modern day? Seriously, instead of speeding it up to get it all in quickly, see what happens if you play it at least on normal speed, or slow it down, and take lovely easy breaths between. Rest your tongue on the roof of your mouth. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, and listen to the pauses. Play the pauses. Play this video at 0.8 or 0.75. See what happens to you. Part of you will get all impatient and go, oh my God, I haven't got enough time to listen to this. Part of you can go, oh, that's interesting, to that part of you. I actually love the idea of experience my proprioceptive awareness. I'm going to listen at 0.75. or point A. And I'm listening for the pauses. That is a power. It's a source of awareness where your spirit can come in and bring you intuitive hits. You know where they're coming from. They're like, where did that come from? And when you hear people say they are mediums or they are channels or they got a download or they got an intuitive hit, they have to be present to the pauses to hear the intuition. What's that got to do with your fascia? Your fascia is the tissue of temporality, according to John Sharkey. And I quote him with love and respect, because he probably knows more about fascia than anybody else in the world. Just saying that. Fascia as the tissue of temporality accumulates time, your history in your body. That's all you can do. You can't be any younger than you are. You can't be any older than you are. In this moment, you are the oldest you've ever been and the youngest you're ever going to be. It also is the tissue through which you animate yourself. Your spiritual animation is your fascial matrix. That's what distinguishes you as alive, right? So you being you right now, listening to me, is present. You're present with me right now. I would love it if you've slowed this down and you're with me on the pauses, because you will hear me giggling. Can you hear the giggle? It's coming through. And what that allows for is your awareness of your intuition. In that place of presence is the whole of time. Be there with your breath. And then you can do your meditation practice. And instead of your little self-talking brain going, oh, I'm not sure if this is the right time. I know I should be doing my practice and it should be for 40 minutes. And all a list of what we call in yoga, chitta vritti, mind chat, all that reasoning, wordy narrative. You can simply be there going, thank you very much for sharing that, sweetie. Do you want to go and climb a tree? Have a walk or go and sit in the forest, do whatever you want. I'm listening to the spaces in between. I'm listening to the pauses. And this is what the client said to me. Her words were, I check in, I love that, I check in to the space in between me and the person I'm talking to. And she said this to me, it's a kind of listening space. It's a kind of seeing space. It's a kind of sensing space. And somehow, including that seems to give me more time and more space to hear them. It's as if I'm more awake to what they're saying and doing. It's almost as if I have a secret seat to watch them from, an observation platform. It's a quiet place inside of me where I can listen to the words and whisper to all the commentary inside my head. And I find myself making these little tiny micro movements that keep that quiet while I'm listening. And what that means is I can hear them. Now, what that client is saying to me is that they are self-regulating. They are in a place where they're listening and can hear spirit guiding them, giving them intuitive hits, giving them intuitive choices, giving them intuitive options. They feel safe inside themselves. But what happens when we self-regulate is that we co-regulate. So the person being listened to feels heard. They experience being heard and they start to calm down. And what we do is enter a co-creative process with that person. It means we're expanding to include both aspects of our brain, both the reasoning that likes describing things and the non-verbal aspect that just likes enjoying them. So I hope we've explored how fascia just might hold a key to that spiritual awakening of what happens when you really, really listen to yourself, to the people you're with, and by default, self-regulate, co-regulate, and animate an atmosphere that's just somehow easier for all concerned. We call it an atmosphere of loving, an atmosphere of kindness, an atmosphere where things like tolerance naturally occur because there's space. I think understanding fascia from this proprioceptive point of view, if we can integrate it well, we're opening ourselves up to a much more holistic approach to our own health and wellness, giving ourselves permission to expand. And instead of having this either or kind of left brain way of divide and conquer, we have either or, but we also have both and neither. Both, neither, either or. We incorporate the wholeness and we allow it to expand and co-create with other wholenesses, and we become whole. We already are whole. We just are awakening to the spiritual wholeness we birthed ourselves into. God bless you. All my love.